At a family dinner, my parents casually announced that my brother and his two kids would be moving in with me. They spoke like the decision had already been made, expecting me to agree without a word. I stayed quiet and didn't argue with them that night. Instead, I waited patiently for the day my brother showed up with all his belongings. What none of them knew was that I had already sold the house a month earlier. I have always been the overlooked one in our family, existing in the shadow of my brother, Tyler, the undisputed golden child. While Tyler was showered with the newest bicycles and expensive gaming consoles, I was left to make do with his cast-offs and practical gifts like books or simple clothing. My parents never missed a single one of Tyler's football games, yet they only bothered to attend one of my debate competitions, and even then, they spent the entire drive home talking about how much Tyler would have appreciated my achievement. When our grandfather passed away, his will served as the final confirmation of my status, granting Tyler the sprawling 4-bedroom family home in the best neighborhood, while I was left with a modest 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of the suburbs. I once overheard my mother begging my grandfather to give Tyler the larger house, arguing that he would eventually need the space for a family, while I would be perfectly fine in the smaller one. I never raised a complaint because, in our household, Tyler's needs always eclipsed mine, and I had learned long ago that protesting was a waste of breath. When Tyler and his wife, Megan, announced at a family dinner that they were selling that house to invest in a tech platform recommended by his friend Jason, I almost choked on my water. They spoke with arrogant confidence about getting in on the ground floor of a revolutionary venture capital project, claiming Jason predicted a massive 300% return within the first year. I tried to inject some caution, reminding them that they had 2 small children and suggesting they look at more stable investment options instead. The atmosphere in the room turned icy instantly. Megan scoffed at my input, and Tyler offered that familiar, condescending smirk I had known since childhood. He reminded me that he had studied finance at Westmore College, while I had only attended community college, implying he possessed a far superior understanding of business and entrepreneurship. He conveniently ignored the fact that I had graduated with honors and earned 2 promotions in 5 years, while he had barely scraped through his degree. He insisted that our grandfather had chosen him for the house because he had a better head for business, and he treated this reckless gamble as a tribute to that legacy. I could have easily dismantled his arguments. I could have pointed out that our grandfather, a man who built his wealth through decades of conservative, careful saving, would have been appalled by such a risky scheme. I could have mentioned that their friend Jason had a track record of 3 failed startups in the last 5 years alone. Instead, I remained silent, realizing that Tyler was an adult responsible for his own choices. After a lifetime of feeling secondary, I had no desire to be the one to save him from his own arrogance. I simply told him it was his decision, which prompted my mother to beam with pride, praising his courage and claiming our grandfather would have been proud of his initiative. For the rest of the evening, they spoke endlessly about vacations to the Maldives and private schooling for the kids, while I sat quietly, mentally planning the next phase of renovations for my own home, which I had been meticulously upgrading using my own savings. 3 months after that dinner, I was relaxing in my freshly renovated bathroom when my phone began to vibrate repeatedly. I ignored it until the 6th missed call from my mother, at which point I stepped out of the shower and called her back, sensing an immediate crisis. Her voice was frayed, and she asked me to come over right away, barely managing to explain that it concerned Tyler. When I arrived at my parents' house, the driveway was cluttered with a mountain of luggage and boxes. Before I could even reach the porch, my niece and nephew rushed toward me, shouting that they were moving in with Grandma and Grandpa. My mother looked exhausted, standing in the doorway while Tyler paced back and forth, furiously speaking on his phone, and Megan sat slumped on the couch, staring blankly at a laptop screen. It became clear that they had been forced out of their luxury apartment because they had burned through every cent from the house sale. After selling the family property, they had purchased a flashy, impractical Porsche, moved into an expensive downtown flat, and sunk $500,000 into Jason's phantom venture, wasting the remaining funds on a lavish vacation. Now, they were back on my parents' doorstep, claiming that the business was just experiencing a slow quarter, but would bounce back soon. My father followed me into the kitchen, looking utterly defeated as he confirmed that they had spent everything and were completely broke. while Tyler struggled to find work, eventually settling for a low-level job at a car dealership. The burden fell on my parents. Mom began calling me regularly, asking for financial assistance for groceries, and although I helped where I could, it frustrated me that Tyler and Megan still clung to their expensive car while begging for money. During a cousin's birthday party, my Aunt Patty pulled me aside to share a devastating piece of news. My parents were so overwhelmed by the situation that they were planning to move Tyler and his family into my house, believing that since I lived alone in a smaller home, I should be the one to sacrifice my space for them. Aunt Patty leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she shattered my world. She told me that my parents, completely at their wits' end with the chaos Tyler had brought into their home, had settled on a desperate plan. They intended to move Tyler, Megan, and the children into my house, convinced that because I lived alone in my two-bedroom cottage, I should be the one to sacrifice my stability for their sake. I stood there frozen, the festive party atmosphere around me blurring into white noise as the sheer audacity of their betrayal washed over me. They weren't just asking for a favor, they were plotting to push me out of the home I had worked so hard to maintain, all while expecting me to shoulder their burdens as if I were nothing more than a secondary character in their lives. As I drove home that night, my mind was a storm of resentment and cold clarity. I knew exactly how it would play out if I stayed. The relentless guilt trips, the emotional manipulation, and the inevitable insistence that the move was just temporary until it became a permanent weight around my neck. Once they moved in, I would be the one paying the bills, cleaning up after them, and eventually being squeezed out of my own space entirely. But not this time. I was done being the silent martyr for the family favorite. That night, with a glass of wine in hand, I devised a plan to reclaim my life. The next morning, I walked into my boss's office without an appointment. I went straight to the point, asking if the senior accounting position at the Pittsburgh branch was still available. Dave, my boss, looked surprised but intrigued. He noted that it was a significant move with more responsibility, but I held my ground, listing my 5 years of excellence and dedication to the firm. He smiled and agreed to make the calls, telling me the position would start in 4 weeks. As soon as I left his office, I called my realtor friend, Jenna. I told her I needed to sell my house immediately. Despite her surprise, she agreed to list it, and because of the renovations I had meticulously completed, we received 3 competitive offers within 5 days. I accepted the highest one, $285,000, which gave me a significant profit. I kept my plans a secret, even as my mother called twice to thank me for the monthly money transfer and to invite me for a family dinner where they wanted to discuss things. I accepted the invitation, playing the part of the dutiful daughter while I quietly moved my life into storage. I sent my belongings to a facility in Pittsburgh, keeping only 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a few essentials. The day before the dinner, I checked into a modest hostel, feeling a strange sense of liberation despite the cramped conditions. When I arrived at my parents' house for the dinner, I parked a block away to keep my packed car hidden. Inside, the tension was suffocating. Tyler and Megan wore smug, forced smiles, and my parents looked profoundly uncomfortable. After some strained small talk, my mother finally steered the conversation toward my house. She used that same persuasive, manipulative tone she had employed my entire life, insisting that it would make perfect sense for Tyler's family to stay with me until they got back on their feet. I asked how long they planned to stay, and Tyler, still clinging to the delusion that his failed business venture was on the verge of a breakthrough, gave a vague answer. I suppressed a dark laugh. 3 months later, and he was still peddling the same fantasy. I pretended to struggle with the decision, letting my shoulders slump in what I hoped looked like a convincing display of defeat. I told them fine, they could move in the following weekend. The relief on their faces was palpable, and they immediately began planning how to redecorate my home, openly discussing which of my things they would throw away or put in the garage. They didn't even notice I was there as a person. I was merely a utility to be used. When I left, I heard them whispering about how reasonable I was, already planning to replace my furniture because my couch apparently killed Tyler's back. I quietly closed the door on them, knowing they were already mourning the loss of a life I had already sold. Back at the hostel, I received a text from my mother thanking me for my understanding. I didn't reply. Instead, I confirmed with Jenna that the house closing was on track and that the new owners would receive their keys on Thursday. The next morning, I headed to the airport, leaving my old life behind. By the time the plane touched down in Pittsburgh, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I moved into a sleek one-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, and my new job provided the fresh start I had craved for years. Then, the explosion happened. It was Thursday, the day Tyler and his family were supposed to move into my house. My phone lit up with dozens of frantic calls and texts from my parents and brother. I could visualize the scene perfectly: the moving truck, the confusion, and the realization that strangers were now the legal owners of the property. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my new couch, debating whether to block them or answer. I chose to answer. My mother's voice was deafening, demanding to know what I had done. When I calmly explained that I had sold the house to a lovely family who now owned it, the silence on the other end was absolute. She called the move underhanded, but I didn't hesitate to remind her that it was a mirror of their own plan to force me out of my home. When she asked where I was, I told her I was in Pittsburgh, having secured a promotion and a better life. Her voice cracked as she realized I had left for good. She insisted that it was different because we were family and they needed help. I cut her off, telling her that they didn't need help, they needed a bailout for their own reckless decisions, and I was no longer the bank for their failures. I pointed out the lifelong pattern of putting Tyler first, from school clothes to the inheritance, and declared that I was finished being the sacrifice. Her tone shifted instantly to something cold and venomous. She told me she no longer considered me her daughter. It stung, but it was a familiar coldness. I informed her that the monthly money transfers were permanently canceled, and despite her protest that they didn't want my money, I hung up and blocked every one of them. I finally turned off my phone, choosing my own peace over their dysfunction, and stepped into the quiet, beautiful reality of my new beginning. I finished my glass of wine in the quiet comfort of my new home, finally feeling the heavy chains of obligation snap away. The following day, I purchased a new phone with a private number, sharing it only with my closest friends, my new colleagues, and a handful of extended family members I still trusted, most notably Aunt Patty, who sent a beautiful congratulatory bouquet the moment she heard how I had reclaimed my independence. 6 months drifted by in a blur of professional success and genuine personal growth. I thrived in my senior role, built a vibrant circle of friends, and enjoyed the freedom of dating without the crushing weight of family judgment hanging over me. Most importantly, for the first time, I lived life entirely on my own terms. Occasionally, my thoughts would drift back to my hometown. I wondered if Tyler and his family were still burdening my parents, or if the ill-fated investment had finally been acknowledged as the disaster it always was. I wondered if my parents ever reflected on their lifetime of favoritism, or if they felt any genuine remorse for the way they had treated me. But honestly, those thoughts became fewer and farther between. I was too busy building a life I actually loved to dwell on the one I had left behind. One Sunday morning, while I was sitting on my balcony enjoying a coffee and the skyline view, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the familiar hometown area code made me pause. A flicker of hesitation crossed my mind, but curiosity won out. "Hello?" I answered. "Riley? It's Beth. I hope it's all right that I got your number from Aunt Patty. I thought you should know what's going on here." A familiar knot of tension tightened in my stomach. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "Tyler and his family are still at your parents' house, and they are deep in financial ruin," she explained. "That investment was a total scam. Jason vanished with everyone's money months ago." I wasn't even surprised, I murmured, feeling only a weary sort of validation. "Yeah, well, things are getting desperate," Beth continued. "Your parents are struggling, too. They're constantly behind on bills because they're supporting 4 extra people in that small house. Your dad even had to come out of retirement to work part-time at the local hardware store." I remained silent, waiting for the expected guilt trip or the inevitable plea for me to send money. But to my surprise, it never came. "I'm not telling you this because I think you should help," Beth said quickly. "Actually, it's the opposite. Everyone in the family is finally talking about it. They're saying you were the smart one, that you were right to get out when you did. Even your mom has admitted to my mom, in private, that they shouldn't have tried to force you out of your house." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, watching the city pulse with life below me. I felt no cruel satisfaction in my family's downfall, but I felt no guilt either. They had made their choices, blinded by greed and a lifetime of bias, and I had made mine. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself, and as I watched the sun begin to set over the horizon, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never go back to being second best again. Subscribe.